There is a part of you that you never talk about, a part you pretend doesn't exist, a part you don't like, don't want, and don't show. And yet, that part quietly makes decisions for you. It chooses your relationships. It chooses your fears. It chooses your reactions. It chooses your limits. This quiet force is called your shadow, and until you face it, it will run your life more than anything else ever will. There is a part of you that you rarely acknowledge and maybe never consciously look at. Yet it follows you everywhere. It sits behind your thoughts, shapes your reactions, influences your relationships, and quietly molds your identity. This hidden part is often misunderstood as something bad, something to eliminate or deny. But the truth is far more complex and far more revealing. The shadow is not evil. It is not broken. It is not something you failed to manage. The shadow is simply everything about yourself that you refuse to see. From the earliest years of life, you are taught to silence certain emotions, hide certain impulses, and mask certain truths. You learn which behaviors earn approval and which ones attract criticism. You absorb the unspoken rules of your environment. Be strong. Don't be emotional. Act confident. Don't make mistakes. Be humble. Don't express your needs too loudly. Slowly, you begin to exile the parts of yourself that don't fit into the image the world praises. You bury the feelings that made others uncomfortable. You suppress the traits that didn't earn love. You hide the memories that still sting. You push down the parts of your personality that someone told you were too much. And each time you hide something, it sinks deeper into the unconscious, forming the structure of your shadow. The shadow is made of your unspoken fears, unmet needs, unresolved wounds, and unexplored desires. It includes the anger you force yourself to swallow, the jealousy you deny, the pride you pretend you don't feel, and the sadness you label as weakness. It's everything you're ashamed to admit, everything you judge in yourself, and everything you believe others won't accept. But it also contains lost strengths, your creativity, your voice, your potential, quality intuition, qualities you abandoned because someone convinced you to shrink. The shadow grows every time you reject a part of yourself, and because you never allow these pieces to be seen, they don't disappear, they wait. They remain alive beneath the surface, influencing your behavior in ways you often don't recognize. When you overreact to a small comment, when you feel threatened by someone's confidence, when you avoid opportunities that scare you, when you cling to patterns you know are unhealthy, these are moments when the shadow speaks through you. Not because it wants to harm you, but because it wants acknowledgement. The shadow doesn't seek to control you. It simply seeks to be seen. This unseen part of you shows up most strongly through projection. When someone irritates you for no logical reason, when you feel instant resistance toward a personality trait in others, when you judge someone harshly for qualities you don't relate to, what you're actually seeing is a reflection of the parts of yourself you've buried. The world becomes your mirror. It doesn't show you who others are, it shows you who you are avoiding. Every strong emotional reaction toward a person is an invitation to look inward. Your shadow uses the people around you to reveal what you refuse to look at internally. The shadow also reveals itself in moments of self-sabotage. When you want success but fear being seen, when you desire love but push people away, when you seek change but cling to old patterns, These conflicts do not come from laziness or lack of ability. They come from the internal divide between your conscious identity and your hidden self. The shadow holds the emotions and beliefs you've suppressed, and when they remain unacknowledged, they influence your actions silently but powerfully. But perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the shadow is this: it does not only contain the darkness you fear, it also contains the light you abandon. The qualities you admire in others, the courage, the confidence, the creativity, the passion, may be qualities that exist within you, but were never nurtured. The shadow holds the parts of you that were discouraged, shamed, or misunderstood, what you call intimidation or admiration is often the shadow pointing toward the potential you have yet to claim. To understand the shadow is to understand yourself without filters, without performance, without fear. It is not an enemy. It is the most honest part of you. It remembers everything you tried to forget and carries everything you tried to hide. It holds your truth even when you're not ready to face it, and it waits patiently for the moment you choose to look inward with courage, curiosity, and compassion. There is a belief many people carry, often unconsciously, that if they don't express their emotions, those emotions will simply disappear. They assume silence equals strength, suppression equals control, and avoidance equals maturity. But the human psyche does not work that way. Unfelt feelings don't fade. Unspoken truths don't dissolve. Unacknowledged pain doesn't soften. Instead, everything you suppress finds another way out through your reactions, habits, impulses, relationships, and the choices you later struggle to understand. Suppressed emotions never die. They simply return wearing different masks. You may think you're holding it together by staying quiet, by pushing discomfort aside, by pretending nothing is wrong. But beneath the surface, the emotional energy you avoid continues to move. And because it cannot leave through expression, it escapes through behavior. It influences how you speak, how you cope, how you love, how you protect yourself, and how you sabotage the very things you want. Suppression does not grant control, it takes control away. Stored anger becomes sudden outbursts that shock you. You tell yourself you're patient, calm, or unbothered, yet one minor irritation can ignite a reaction that feels disproportionate even to you. That's not you losing it. That is years of anger you swallowed, finally demanding release in the only way it knows. When emotions build pressure inside the unconscious, they do not whisper, they erupt. Unfelt sadness becomes emotional numbness. When you bury grief long enough, you don't just avoid sorrow. You lose your ability to feel joy, excitement, passion, or connection. You begin moving through life on autopilot. Nothing touches you deeply, not because you lack emotion, but because you've blocked the entire emotional spectrum to avoid the pain sitting at its center. The more you suppress, the more disconnected you become from everything that makes life warm and meaningful. Ignored fear becomes avoidance. You start postponing opportunities, delaying decisions, hesitating to take risks, convincing yourself you're being logical or responsible. But beneath those excuses lies a fear you never acknowledged, fear of failure, rejection, exposure, or disappointment. Because you never dealt with it directly, it silently shapes your path, shrinking your world until you feel trapped in routines that keep you safe but unfulfilled. Unspoken resentment becomes passive aggression. When you feel wronged but stay silent to keep the peace, the unresolved hurt doesn't vanish. It leaks out through sarcasm, withdrawal, coldness, impatience, or subtle hostility you can't fully explain. You tell yourself you're not angry, but your behavior tells the truth your voice refuses to speak. Suppressed resentment becomes a silent wall between you and the people you care about. Buried insecurity becomes perfectionism or defensiveness. When you secretly feel inadequate, but never acknowledge it, you compensate by trying to be flawless or by reacting strongly whenever someone challenges you. You become overly sensitive to criticism, even when it's mild or well-intentioned. That's not ego. It's unspoken vulnerability demanding protection through rigid emotional armor. Feelings you avoid do not disappear. They migrate. They shift from the emotional mind into the behavioral mind. They show up not as gentle reminders, but as uncontrollable impulses. The less conscious you are of your emotions, the more power they gain over your actions. What you refuse to feel consciously, you express unconsciously. Relationships often become the stage where suppressed emotions play out most intensely. You may lash out at someone you love, not because of what they did, but because they triggered an old wound you never addressed. You may pull away from someone who gets too close, not because they're unsafe, but because closeness stirs feelings you were taught to bury. You may stay silent in moments when your heart is begging you to speak, because expression feels dangerous after years of suppression. Connection becomes complicated not because you lack the desire to love, but because suppressed emotions interfere with your ability to show up as your true self. Suppression is often learned young. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where emotions were dismissed, punished, or mocked. Maybe you were told to be strong, to stop crying, to not make things a big deal. So you taught yourself that the safest way to exist was to feel less. But the emotional body does not obey logic, it obeys truth. And truth always finds a way out. When you suppress emotions, your body speaks for you through tension, anxiety, fatigue, headaches, or sleeplessness. Your behavior speaks for you through reactions you regret. Your decisions speak for you through fear-based choices. Your relationships speak for you through conflict, distance, or misunderstandings. Every part of your life becomes a messenger for the emotions you refuse to claim. Suppressed emotions become uncontrolled behaviors because anything pushed into the dark grows stronger there. What you hide gains influence. What you avoid gains intensity. What you refuse to feel gains control. And what you suppress ultimately becomes the very force that dictates how you live, how you love, and how you see yourself. There is a strange and powerful truth about human behavior that most people never realize. The qualities you judge most intensely in others are often the qualities you have not yet accepted in yourself. The people who trigger you, irritate you, fascinate you, or unsettle you are not random. They are mirrors. They reflect the unacknowledged parts of your inner world, the parts you suppressed, denied, or disowned. This process is called projection, and it is one of the clearest pathways through which the shadow tries to get your attention. Projection happens when the unconscious attempts to reveal what the conscious mind refuses to see. Instead of recognizing an uncomfortable trait or emotion within yourself, you attach it to someone else. This is not weakness or failure. It is the psyche's attempt to help you grow. But because the revelation feels too threatening or too painful to accept directly, the mind reroutes it outward. The world becomes the screen upon which you project your hidden emotional truths. If you feel triggered by someone's arrogance, it may be because you were taught to bury your own confidence or assertiveness. If someone's emotional intensity bothers you, it might be because you learned to numb your own emotions. If another person's impulsiveness frustrates you, perhaps you have an inner desire for freedom that you never allowed yourself to express. The traits you deny in yourself are often the traits you cannot tolerate in others. Projection is not always negative. Admiration can be just as revealing. When you admire someone deeply, when you're drawn to their courage, creativity, passion, or presence, it may be because those qualities exist within you but remain undeveloped, unclaimed, or suppressed. The shadow doesn't only contain darkness, it holds your lost light too, the gifts you abandon to fit the expectations of others. Admiration becomes the shadow saying, "This belongs to you too, if you're willing to claim it." But most people don't recognize this. Instead, they assume their judgments are objective truths about others. They don't realize they are looking at pieces of themselves projected outward. This is why emotional reactions often feel so disproportionate. You may feel an intense dislike for someone based on something small, or feel threatened by someone who did nothing wrong. That intensity does not arise from the present moment. It arises from your own unintegrated history. Every strong emotional reaction is a message. The person in front of you is not the source. They are the trigger. The emotion belongs to you. When you understand this, your entire approach to conflict, relationships, and self-perception begins to shift. Instead of blaming others for how you feel, you begin asking deeper questions. What is this reaction trying to reveal about me? What part of myself am I seeing in this person? What am I avoiding internally that keeps showing up externally? The shadow seeks recognition because it cannot evolve without awareness. When your unconscious wants to surface a hidden truth, it uses projection as a bridge. You see in others what you cannot yet accept in yourself. This is not a mistake. It is an invitation. Your judgments become clues. Your triggers become maps. Your insecurities become teachers. Every projection is a signal pointing toward a part of you that wants healing, understanding, or expression. Consider how relationships become the greatest mirrors of all. The closer someone gets to you, the more clearly they reflect your shadow. Partners, friends, and family members often trigger you not because they are wrong, but because they touch emotional wounds you never tended to. You may accuse them of being too distant, too needy, too insensitive, too intense, too controlling, not realizing that these accusations often reveal your own unmet needs, unresolved fears, or suppressed desires. Projection can also distort perception. When your shadow takes over, you may misinterpret someone's intentions, assign them motives they don't have, or react to them based on old wounds rather than present reality. You might feel judged when no judgment exists. You might feel attacked when no threat is present. You might feel abandoned even when you were not left. These distortions happen because the emotional charge comes from within, not from the situation itself. Yet projection also carries immense healing potential. It shows you exactly where your work lies. It reveals what you've been avoiding. It points toward the parts of yourself that remain outside your acceptance. When you recognize projection in action, you take back your power. Instead of allowing the shadow to operate unconsciously, you bring awareness to the pattern. You ask what the trigger symbolizes rather than who caused it. You look inward instead of outward. The moment you start doing this, the world becomes less threatening and more illuminating. People no longer feel like enemies or obstacles. They become mirrors that help you understand yourself more deeply. Conflict becomes an opportunity to grow. Jealousy becomes an invitation to develop your own potential. Annoyance becomes a signpost directing you toward a buried emotion. And admiration becomes encouragement from your shadow, nudging you toward the strengths you have forgotten. You possess. Integration does not begin with perfection, discipline, or positivity. It begins with something far more uncomfortable and far more transformative: radical honesty. Not the polite honesty you use in conversations, not the selective honesty you apply when it's convenient, but the kind of honesty that forces you to confront the truth you buried, the truth you've avoided, and the truth you've been afraid to speak even to yourself. This is the honesty that breaks illusions, dissolves masks, and reveals who you truly are beneath the roles and defenses you've built to survive. Most people never reach this depth of honesty because the mind is skilled at creating protective stories. You tell yourself you're fine when you're not. You convince yourself you've moved on when the wound still throbs beneath the surface. You justify unhealthy behavior as just how you are, because acknowledging the real reason would demand courage you don't feel ready to give. You pretend certain desires don't matter because wanting them feels risky or shameful. The truth becomes wrapped in layers of denial, distraction, and self-deception. But integration, the process of becoming whole, requires you to dismantle those layers. It requires you to stop negotiating with your own truth. It begins the moment you're running from your feelings, your contradictions, your fears, and your unmet needs. Radical honesty is the doorway through which the shadow, the ego, and the conscious self can finally meet. Without honesty, they remain fragmented, each part operating independently, often in conflict with one another. Radical honesty means acknowledging the emotions you've suppressed. It means admitting you are hurt when you've spent years pretending to be strong. It means confessing your jealousy, envy, or insecurity instead of hiding behind defensiveness. It means accepting your anger instead of labeling yourself as someone who never gets mad. Emotional honesty dismantles the internal war between who you are and who you claim to be. It also means facing your motives, not the motives you tell the world, but the ones you whisper only in the quietest corners of your mind. You may act generous to feel worthy. You may chase success to validate your identity. You may avoid risks to protect an old wound. You may cling to people because you fear being alone. You may push people away because closeness threatens your sense of control. Radical honesty exposes the hidden engine behind your choices, revealing the truth you rarely admit. Most of your actions are shaped by emotions you haven't fully processed. Radical honesty also requires admitting the darker parts of yourself, the traits you judge, hide, or deny. Maybe you can be controlling. Maybe you're afraid of intimacy. Maybe you struggle with pride. Maybe you crave admiration more than you want to admit. Maybe you resent responsibilities you pretend to embrace. These truths are uncomfortable because they challenge the identity you've crafted. But integration cannot happen in the presence of self-delusion. You cannot heal a wound you deny. You cannot transform a trait you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot face a shadow you pretend doesn't exist. This level of honesty is not about shame, it is about awareness. Shame keeps the shadow alive. Awareness dissolves it. When you can say, yes, this is me, and I will not run from it anymore, the part of you that once controlled you begins to soften. It no longer needs to hide. It no longer needs to sabotage. It no longer needs to act out through projection, impulsive behavior, or emotional reactivity. Your truth stops fighting for your attention because you finally give it a voice. But radical honesty is not only internal, it influences your external life too. It changes the way you communicate. You stop saying, it's fine, when you're hurting. You stop pretending you don't care. You stop agreeing to things that betray your boundaries. You stop hiding your needs in the hope that someone will guess them. You stop molding yourself into someone acceptable. Instead, you begin speaking from the core of your being, expressing truths that once felt too dangerous to reveal. This level of openness creates alignment. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to match. Your words carry weight because they are rooted in truth rather than avoidance. Your relationships deepen because honesty replaces performance. Your shadow slowly merges with your conscious identity, forming a self that is no longer divided. Integration becomes possible because you are finally seeing yourself without distortion, without excuses, without fear of the truth that has lived inside you all along. Wholeness is one of the deepest longings of the human heart. Yet most people chase it in the wrong direction. They try to become whole through perfection, by correcting every flaw, hiding every weakness, controlling every impulse, refining every part of their personality until nothing messy remains. They believe that if they can sculpt themselves into an ideal version, they will finally earn love, safety, acceptance, and inner peace. But perfection is not the path to wholeness. Perfection is a prison. Perfection demands performance, not authenticity. You do not become whole by eliminating your imperfections. You become whole by integrating all the parts of yourself you've tried to deny. Perfection tells you that you must always be strong, composed, successful, stable, and admirable. It tells you that your vulnerability is a liability, your mistakes are evidence of failure, and your contradictions are flaws. And so you create a polished version of yourself, persona that the world sees, approves of, and praises. But beneath that mask lies a life you rarely allow others to witness: the uncertainty, the fear, the shame, the longing, the complexity. Perfection demands that you hide these parts. Wholeness requires that you welcome them. True healing begins the moment you understand that wholeness is not the absence of darkness. It is the integration of both your light and your shadow. You cannot become whole by cutting off the parts of yourself that feel inconvenient or uncomfortable. You become whole when you gather those pieces, acknowledge them, and allow them to be part of your identity. Being real means accepting your full humanity, not just the polished parts you show the world, but the raw, unfiltered truths you usually keep hidden. When you strive for perfection, you live in constant tension. You're always watching yourself, always performing, always afraid that one wrong move will expose the parts of you you've spent years burying. Every flaw becomes a threat. Every emotion becomes a burden. Every moment of vulnerability feels like a crack in the mask you've worked so hard to keep intact. Perfection isolates you from yourself. Realness reconnects you. Wholeness begins when you allow yourself to be imperfect without labeling. those imperfections as failures. It is not about lowering standards or ignoring growth. It is about recognizing that the parts you judge the most are often the parts that need compassion, not correction. Your insecurities reveal where your inner child still seeks reassurance. Your anger exposes the boundaries you've allowed others to cross. Your fear highlights the experiences that still feel unresolved. Your jealousy points to desires you've been taught to suppress. These emotions are not signs of being broken. They are guides. They lead you toward truth if you're willing to listen. Being real means letting yourself feel what you feel without shame. It means acknowledging that you're not always confident, strong, or composed, and that this does not make you less worthy. It means admitting that you desire love, validation, safety, connection, and recognition. It means owning your contradictions, wanting closeness but fearing it, wanting independence but craving support, wanting success but fearing visibility. Your contradictions are not weaknesses, they are reflections of your complexity. Wholeness also comes from embracing your humanity in relationships. You stop pretending you don't care when someone hurts you. You stop acting invincible when you're breaking inside. You stop shrinking yourself to avoid discomfort. You stop editing your personality to meet expectations. When you're real with others, you create connection instead of performance. You allow yourself to be seen not as a polished character, but as a human being with depth, emotion, history, and truth. This honesty draws people who resonate with your authenticity rather than your presentation. Perfection demands control. Realness allows vulnerability. Perfection isolates. Realness connects. Perfection punishes you for being human. Realness honors your humanity. Wholeness is not built through constant self-improvement. It is built through self-acceptance. Improvement has value, but it must come from a place of compassion, not from the belief that you must fix yourself to be enough. When you understand this, growth becomes a natural expansion of who you are, not a desperate attempt to hide who you fear you might be. You become real by embracing your shadow as much as your light, your flaws as much as your strengths, your chaos as much as your clarity. Wholeness means living in alignment with your authentic self, not the self you perform, not the self you curate, not the self you think others want, but the self that exists when no one is watching.